May 12, 1944. The sky over England was no longer a sky at all. It was a moving ocean of steel and aluminum, wings upon wings stretching from horizon to horizon, a storm of engines beating the air into thunder. German soldiers in occupied France looked upward, their eyes wide, their hearts sinking, as the sun itself dimmed behind the mass. To them it felt impossible. An army of aircraft so vast it drowned the heavens in shadow. On the ground, Wehrmacht units whispered in disbelief. Could any nation produce such numbers? Only months earlier in Berlin, generals had laughed at American brashness. They sneered at a nation they called soft, at an industry they dismissed as amateur. But now, as the endless drone filled their ears, they understood the truth. The United States had become the arsenal of the skies. The first waves of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators moved like a living organism. Their contrails etched white scars across the blue, each one a path to destruction. German flak crews scrambled, their guns barking into the void. Black puffs exploded among the bomber streams, shaking cockpits, tearing holes through fuselages. Yet the formation did not break. Pilots tightened their grips on controls, engines roared in defiance, and the great metal swarm kept advancing, relentless, inevitable. Below in command bunkers, German officers struggled to comprehend the scale. Intelligence reports had warned them, but the human mind could not truly imagine 100,000 planes. Now the proof was overhead, thundering toward the Reich with mechanical certainty. In those moments, fear mingled with awe. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was stretched thin, exhausted by years of combat. Fighter aces, who had once claimed dozens of kills, now faced skies so crowded with targets that even victory felt hollow. A Me-109 darted into the formation, guns blazing, but for every bomber that spiraled downward in smoke, a dozen more filled the gap. Like cutting a drop of water from the sea, the effect was negligible. The American armada surged on, blotting out despair, overwhelming calculation itself. It was no longer a battle of individual machines. It was a war of production, a test of factories, foundries, and assembly lines. The story began not on the battlefield, but in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and California's coastal yards. It began with riveters hammering day and night, with engineers sketching blueprints at dawn, with trains and trucks carrying parts across a continent that seemed endless in its capacity. German generals had studied America in the 1930s and laughed. They saw jazz clubs, Hollywood films, automobiles, and consumer luxuries. They mistook abundance for weakness. To them, the United States was a land of play, not war. But now those same automobile plants that once turned out shiny sedans were spitting forth P-51 Mustangs, engines tuned not for Sunday drives but for duels at 20,000 feet. Assembly lines that once crafted typewriters now churned out .50 caliber machine guns by the tens of thousands. In this vast transformation lay the secret weapon Germany had never prepared to face. Night after night, American workers toiled under floodlights, their shifts measured not by hours but by victories yet to come. Women who had never seen an aircraft before now riveted wings to fuselages, each strike echoing like a drumbeat of inevitability. A nation's pulse quickened, and industry became the front line. It was not glamorous, it was not celebrated with medals. But in every completed bomber, in every crate of ammunition, in every polished propeller shaft, there was the invisible signature of millions who would never fire a shot yet would shape the outcome of the war more decisively than any general. By mid-1944, the evidence was undeniable. The Luftwaffe's intelligence units reported staggering numbers. The Americans had produced over 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone, more than Germany had built in the entire war. The figures were so vast they seemed like propaganda, but the wreckage scattered across Europe told the truth. German commanders had scoffed at the thought of facing such strength. Now, as the skies darkened daily with bomber streams and escort fighters, their arrogance curdled into dread. Quantity has a quality all its own, a phrase often whispered in Soviet halls, now seemed carved into the American strategy. This was not mere quantity, it was overwhelming, industrial tidal force, a storm rolling across the Atlantic and crashing into the heart of the Reich. Imagine the perspective of a German infantryman in Normandy, Crouching in a trench on the morning of June 6, 1944, the earth trembled under artillery, but above him the air seemed alive. Waves of C-47 Dakotas stretched out of sight, their bellies opening to release paratroopers like seeds scattered by the wind. Fighters screamed overhead, diving and strafing, the roar of Merlin and Pratt and Whitney engines blending into an unbroken howl. To that soldier, the war was no longer man against man. It was man against a machine too vast to comprehend, a machine powered not by oil and steel alone, but by a nation's collective will. In Berlin, the laughter had long since faded. General staff officers, once confident in Blitzkrieg's brilliance, now sat in silence as charts filled with production figures told the grim reality. For every German fighter built, America built 6. For every tank Germany rolled out, Detroit built 20. For every artillery shell manufactured in the Reich, American factories forged dozens. The war was no longer about tactical genius or daring offensives. It was about time, resources, and the grinding inevitability of industrial might. Hitler had boasted that willpower alone would overcome, but willpower could not replace assembly lines, nor could a ideology forge the aluminum wings needed to defend the Reich. Still, the German spirit did not break easily. Pilots climbed into cockpits knowing the odds, their breath fogging in cramped canopies, their fingers trembling over triggers. Some scored kills, streaking through formations like arrows of desperation, but the cost was unbearable. Every loss of an experienced pilot was irreplaceable, while America, with its vast training programs, flooded the skies with fresh aviators. For Germany, the clock was ticking louder with every passing month. For America, each bomber that roared aloft was another nail in the coffin of the Reich. The thunder of engines became the soundtrack of Europe. From dawn raids over Schweinfurt to the firebombing of Dresden, the relentless storm of steel never ceased. Civilians gazed upward with despair. Factories crumbled, oil supplies burned. Germany's war machine, once feared for its efficiency, now bled from 1,000 wounds inflicted not just by bullets but by production lines 3,000 miles away. The laughter of generals had given way to whispers of inevitability. The Americans had not only built planes, they had built a new kind of war, one in which industry itself was the decisive battlefield. And so the hook was set. The German High Command had underestimated a nation it thought too soft, too indulgent, too distracted by comfort. But as the skies filled with endless wings, they realized their miscalculation had doomed them. This was not just air power. This was the embodiment of a nation's strength, discipline and resolve. 100,000 planes hammering the Reich into submission, one rivet at a time. By 1942, the Axis tide seemed unstoppable. The Wehrmacht had thundered across Europe in lightning strikes that stunned the world. France had fallen in weeks. The Low Countries crumbled in days, and the Soviet Union reeled under the hammer of Operation Barbarossa. In the skies, the Luftwaffe had once been the very symbol of invincibility. German pilots in Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs carved through opposition with terrifying precision. Their aircraft bore the reputation of predators, sleek and lethal, and in the great halls of Berlin, generals and ministers boasted of technological superiority, convinced that no nation, least of all the United States, could rival their war machine. Yet across the Atlantic, a different kind of storm was building. The United States in 1941 was a nation reluctant to fight. Isolationism still lingered, scarred by memories of the Great War. American forces were small compared to European armies, their equipment outdated, their doctrines untested. When German officers studied America, they saw weakness. The joke spread like wildfire. The Americans may build refrigerators, but can they build tanks? They make typewriters, but can they make fighters? For many in Berlin, the idea of America as a serious military opponent was laughable. But beneath the laughter, Germany had failed to grasp the true nature of American power. While Europe had been fighting, the United States had been producing. Its factories were the largest in the world, its natural resources vast, its workforce young, energetic, and ready to be mobilized. Unlike Europe, scarred by years of bombardment and shortage, America's homeland remained untouched, safe behind two oceans. The arsenal of democracy, as President Roosevelt called it, was awakening. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. In 1940, before Pearl Harbor, the United States had produced fewer than 6,000 aircraft. By 1943, that number leapt to over 85,000. By 1944, it peaked at nearly 100,000 planes in a single year. This was not evolution, it was revolution. No nation in history had ever shifted gears so dramatically, converting peacetime industry into wartime production on such a staggering scale. Automobile plants became bomber plants. Steel once used for skyscrapers now became fuselages and propellers. Entire cities transformed into engines of war. Germany had miscalculated the American spirit. The attack on Pearl Harbor erased hesitation, turning isolation into fury. Factories that once ran one shift now ran three. Women who had been homemakers became machinists, riveters, and inspectors. African American workers, long excluded from certain jobs, now filled critical roles in assembly lines. Immigrants, students, and retirees alike poured their strength into production. America was no longer a sleeping giant. It was a giant fully awake, its every breath feeding the furnaces of war. The contrast with Germany could not have been sharper. Hitler's Reich had entered the war with a head start in military production, but it lacked the depth of resources and the sheer industrial elasticity of the United States. Germany built aircraft of extraordinary quality, sleek Me-262 jets, powerful Fev-190S, the deadly Stuka dive bomber. But production was fractured, disrupted by Allied bombing, and plagued by shortages. While America streamlined its assembly lines, Germany's factories were dispersed, its labor force depleted by conscription, its fuel reserves dwindling. For every precision-crafted German fighter, America built dozens of aircraft that might not have been as elegant, but were reliable, durable, and endless in number. This imbalance soon became obvious on the battlefield. In North Africa, German panzers outmatched early American Shermans in duels, yet the Americans never ran out of tanks. In the skies, Luftwaffe aces scored astonishing kill counts, yet the flood of American bombers and fighters replaced every loss with two more. For the Germans, the math was merciless. No matter how skilled their pilots or how advanced their technology, they could not escape the industrial avalanche bearing down upon them. Doctrines clashed as well. Germany's war had been built on blitzkrieg, fast, concentrated strikes that shattered enemies before they could recover. It was a doctrine reliant on speed, surprise, and tightly coordinated units. But blitzkrieg required limited fronts and manageable numbers. Against the Soviet Union, the front stretched for thousands of miles. Against the United States, the opponent was not merely a military but an entire continent-sized factory. Blitzkrieg's brilliance dissolved when faced with an enemy that could not be knocked out quickly, that could absorb losses and return tenfold. For the Americans, doctrine was still forming. Early mistakes in Tunisia revealed inexperience and poor coordination. German commanders sneered, seeing green troops collapse under seasoned panzer divisions. But what they failed to recognize was America's adaptability. Unlike Germany, which relied on hardened veterans, the US military learned, adjusted, and applied lessons with frightening speed. Radios linked units more effectively. Logistics pipelines grew more efficient. And behind every soldier was the guarantee that replacements of men, of tanks, of planes were always coming. By 1943, the laughter in Berlin had grown quieter. Reports from the front described endless convoys, skies thick with bombers, and relentless artillery barrages. American divisions might falter in one battle, but they returned stronger in the next. German intelligence analysts began to warn, this was not the America they had mocked. This was something different, something terrifying in its persistence and scope. The psychological shift was profound. German officers who once ridiculed American softness now found themselves describing an enemy that fought not just with courage but with machinery, not just with tactics but with production. Every destroyed American bomber seemed irrelevant when dozens more crossed the skies the next morning. Every sunk Liberty ship was replaced by two more sliding off the docks. The very nature of the war was changing before their eyes, from a contest of armies to a contest of economies. And yet disbelief lingered. Hitler himself clung to the idea that America's industrial power was a mirage, that the nation lacked the will to endure a long war. He dismissed Roosevelt's promises as propaganda, convinced that American society would collapse under rationing, under loss, under sacrifice. But on the assembly lines of Detroit, Chicago, and Los Angeles, the reality was very different. Sacrifice became routine, endurance became national character, and laughter turned to silence as the numbers kept climbing. The stage was set for the hidden advantage to reveal itself fully. Not on the ground in Tunisia, not in the hedgerows of Normandy, but in the skies above Europe, where endless waves of American aircraft would demonstrate what no German general had ever truly believed, that in modern war, factories could be deadlier than field marshals, and riveters could shape the fate of nations. The Germans first noticed it in fragments. Like whispers carried on the wind, reports trickled in from the front. Enemy formations that seemed to recover overnight, convoys that never stopped, skies that filled again even after devastating losses. At first, they dismissed it as exaggeration, the desperate illusions of soldiers overwhelmed in the field. But soon the pattern became undeniable. Somewhere, somehow, the Americans had tapped into a reservoir of strength the Reich could neither match nor comprehend. The hidden advantage was not a single weapon, not a single tank, nor even a single strategy. It was something deeper, something invisible, yet overwhelming, the full mobilization of industry. Where Germany fought with soldiers, America fought with factories. The battlefield was not only in Normandy or North Africa, it was in Detroit, in Seattle, in the vast steel mills of Pennsylvania, and the roaring shipyards of California. American generals understood that wars are not won only with courage, they are won with supply chains, production schedules, and the steady hum of assembly lines that never slept. At the heart of this advantage was a philosophy alien to German command. The Reich had prized quality above all. Tanks were engineered like masterpieces. Aircraft designed as if for exhibition, precision tools crafted with almost obsessive detail. But perfection took time, and time was the one commodity Germany could not afford. America took another path. American factories embraced standardization, mass production, and speed. A Sherman tank could be built faster than a Panzer could be repaired. A P-51 Mustang could roll off an assembly line in days, while Germany struggled to keep its own fighters supplied with scarce materials. In this brutal arithmetic, the United States had discovered its hidden edge, not superior craftsmanship, but the relentless tide of quantity, consistency, and replacement. For the Luftwaffe, the revelation came with particular sting. In 1943, German aces like Erich Hartmann and Walter Nowotny still dominated the skies, their kill counts climbing into the hundreds. Yet for every bomber they shot down, for every P-47 Thunderbolt sent flaming into the fields below, two more rose to take its place the next day. German intelligence soon realized that America was producing planes at rates inconceivable to the Reich. In 1944 alone, the United States built more aircraft than Germany had produced in the entire course of the war. To the pilots who watched the skies darken with endless formations, it felt like facing an enemy with infinite lives. The secret lay not only in numbers but in logistics. American supply lines stretched like arteries across the oceans, pumping fuel, ammunition, and spare parts with staggering efficiency. Liberty ships, welded together in weeks instead of months, carried entire armies' worth of material across the Atlantic. Each time a German submarine sent one to the bottom, two more replaced it almost instantly. For the Wehrmacht, the math was suffocating. The Atlantic, once seen as a natural barrier, had become America's conveyor belt of war. Then there was the power of coordination. Radios, once a novelty, became the nervous system of American warfare, where German units sometimes fought blind, cut off when commanders fell. American forces spoke to each other constantly, weaving their movements into a single unified strike. Bomber formations could shift course mid-flight. Fighters could redirect to cover vulnerable squadrons. Artillery could be called down with chilling accuracy. German generals marveled and fumed. How could this amateur nation, once mocked for its supposed lack of discipline, move with such precision? The answer was simple. Industrial might had been married to technological innovation. But the most devastating aspect of this hidden advantage was psychological. German soldiers who once believed they fought against weaklings, now found themselves crushed beneath an enemy that never seemed to weaken. Every loss inflicted upon the Americans felt meaningless. Every victory hollow. Where the Reich bled from irreplaceable wounds, the Americans simply absorbed, rebuilt, and returned stronger. The laughter that had once echoed in Berlin's command halls turned bitter, replaced by whispers of dread. Even Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter leaders, admitted in his memoirs that the Luftwaffe had been blindsided by the sheer scale of American air power. It was not their tactics alone that defeated us, he reflected, but their industry. They built planes faster than we could destroy them. This was the hidden advantage, revealed not in a single battle, but in the unbroken rhythm of American output. The Reich had underestimated not just the nation, but the machinery behind it. The sight of endless American bombers over the Reich was not just a military threat, it was a symbol. To the German people, it meant their leaders had lied. They had been told America was weak, incapable of sustaining war. Yet here was the truth, roaring above their cities, raining steel upon their factories, blotting out the sky with proof of a reality they had been conditioned to deny. Each raid carried not just bombs but a message: the United States could build forever, and Germany could not. For the Allies, this hidden advantage became the backbone of victory. Where Britain provided resilience and the Soviet Union provided blood, the United States provided steel, oil, and the engines of war. American soldiers marched forward with the certainty that replacements would come, that their weapons would be resupplied, that their skies would be filled with friendly aircraft. German soldiers, by contrast, grew increasingly isolated, their machines breaking down, their fuel dwindling, their skies darkening with enemy shadows. This imbalance, invisible at first, became the decisive factor. The hidden advantage was not glamorous, not the stuff of battlefield heroics. It was something far more enduring: the hum of assembly lines, the discipline of workers, the sheer grinding will of a nation that had transformed its economy into a weapon sharper than any sword. And as the war dragged on, this secret would move from rumor to undeniable reality, crushing the Reich beneath the weight of numbers it could never hope to match. The secret, once whispered on the front lines, could no longer be denied. America's advantage was not only the sheer number of aircraft filling the skies, but the engineering genius and industrial mastery that made those numbers possible. The technical foundation of the Allied air armada was not built on luck. It was forged in blueprints, steel presses, and the minds of designers who understood that war was as much about machinery as it was about men. Consider the B-17 Flying Fortress, the workhorse of the daylight bombing campaign. Weighing over 65,000 pounds when fully loaded, with a wingspan of 103 feet, it carried up to 8,000 pounds of bombs over distances of 2,000 miles. Powered by 4 Wright R1820 Cyclone radial engines, each delivering 1,200 horsepower, it was not just a bomber, it was a fortress in the sky, bristling with up to 13.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. Crews trusted it to bring them home, even when riddled with holes, engines on fire, fuselage torn apart by flak. American industry produced over 12,700 B-17s, each one a flying testament to the marriage of engineering and mass production. Then came the B-24 Liberator, a machine that embodied efficiency. Faster than the B-17, with longer range and a higher bomb load, the B-24 was produced in numbers so vast it became the most built heavy bomber in history. Over 18,000 units rolled out. Its distinctive twin tail and Davis wing design gave it superior performance, and though crews often grumbled about its handling, it was a technical marvel of streamlined design. At Willow Run, the massive plant designed by Henry Ford's engineers, one B-24 rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes. Precision and volume fused together in a symphony of riveters, welders, and foremen orchestrating the largest industrial effort the world had ever seen. Escort was the key to survival, and here the P-51 Mustang emerged as the war's scalpel. With a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine purring beneath its sleek frame, the Mustang could reach 437 miles per hour and escort bombers deep into German airspace, something no earlier fighter could achieve. Its range stretched beyond 1,600 miles with drop tanks, giving the bomber streams a guardian angel that turned Luftwaffe hunting grounds into slaughterhouses. Precision engineering had made it fast, agile, and lethal, but it was American industrial muscle that flooded the skies with nearly 15,000 of them. Each machine was more than a weapon. It was a triumph of supply chains. The SCR-522 radios fitted into fighters gave pilots crystal clear communication. No more static, no more garbled signals. Coordination that Germany had once enjoyed in early blitzkrieg battles now belonged to the Americans. Bombers and escorts spoke to each other across frequencies that the Germans could not jam, linking thousands of machines into a single organism that moved as one. And then there were the engines. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, a twin-row, 18-cylinder radial, powered legends like the P-47 Thunderbolt, F-6F Hellcat, and F-4U Corsair. Delivering over 2,000 horsepower, it transformed fighters into brutes of speed and resilience. In the Pacific, Hellcats dominated the skies, racking up a kill ratio of 19-1 against Japanese Zeros. In Europe, Thunderbolts dove through bomber formations with their 8.50 caliber guns, shredding German interceptors with terrifying bursts of fire. The Germans built marvels like the Daimler-Benz DB605 and the Jumo 004 jet engine, but their production was sporadic, their reliability inconsistent, and their numbers paltry compared to the American flood. Factories became cathedrals of war. At the Douglas plant in Long Beach, the skeletons of bombers hung like metallic whales, riveters swarming across their skins. In Seattle, Boeing's hangars stretched further than the eye could see, workers swarming through endless aisles of half-finished planes. In Detroit, Chrysler and General Motors, once purveyors of family cars, now produced tanks, aircraft engines and armored vehicles in numbers the Reich could scarcely imagine. It was not just scale, it was speed. While Germany required months to complete a Panther tank, American lines could push out multiple Shermans in a single day. Specifications told the truth the naked eye could not ignore. The SCR-508 tank radios weighed 181 pounds, contained 2,748 components, and delivered 25 watts of crystal-controlled power, more than double the range of the German Fug-5. A Sherman tank could call for artillery, coordinate with infantry, and adjust movements in real time. German panzers, silent and isolated, relied on flags or hand signals once command tanks were destroyed. This technical disparity turned engagements into massacres, not because the Americans were braver, but because they were connected. The German response, though ingenious, was too little and too late. Their Me-262 jet was a marvel, capable of speeds beyond any piston-engine fighter. Their Tiger tanks, with 88 guns, could destroy Shermans at impossible ranges. But these machines were scarce, plagued by mechanical issues, and devoured resources Germany no longer had. Each Tiger was an engineering masterpiece. But while one Tiger rolled off the line, America built dozens of Shermans. Each Me-262 soared like a glimpse of the future. But while one jet flew, America had already filled the skies with P-51C and P-47S. The technical marvels of the Reich became isolated curiosities, while American machines became an unstoppable tide. What made this even more remarkable was that America's arsenal was not confined to aircraft alone. Alongside planes came trucks, jeeps, landing craft and Liberty ships, all standardized, all designed for speed of manufacture. The GMC CCK Debut, deuce and a half truck, simple and rugged, became the backbone of Allied logistics, with over 500,000 produced. In a single week, American factories could churn out more trucks than Germany built in an entire year. These vehicles kept the armies supplied, the bombers fueled, the tanks moving. Without them, the planes would have been statues of steel. Behind each statistic was human ingenuity. Motorola engineers designed radios that pierced through static. Allison and Rolls-Royce perfected engines that blended endurance with power. Metallurgists developed alloys that resisted cracking under stress. Thousands of unnamed inventors, draftsmen and foremen quietly revolutionized warfare from behind drafting tables and workbenches. The technical deep dive revealed the truth that German generals had refused to accept. America's hidden advantage was not just numbers. It was the ability to engineer war on an industrial scale, to marry precision with mass, to create machines that were not only deadly but endlessly replaceable. The Reich could marvel at its Tigers, its Stukas, its jets, but none of it could stand against the symphony of steel orchestrated by American industry. And so when German eyes turned skyward and saw wave after wave of bombers blotting out the sun, they were not merely witnessing aircraft. They were staring at the manifestation of an entire nation's technical genius, a tide of machinery that no amount of valor or skill could ever stop. September 19th, 1944. Dawn broke over Lorraine, France. But the light did little to comfort the German soldiers dug into the ridges near Aricourt. Mist clung to the valleys, rolling in thick sheets across the fields, obscuring movement, muffling sound. Somewhere in that fog, American engines rumbled, a low, ominous growl that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The 11th Panzer Division, seasoned veterans of the Eastern Front, braced for an attack they could not yet see. They were confident. After all, they had Panthers, sleek, powerful, with 75 guns capable of piercing American Shermans long before the Shermans could reply, and they knew the Americans were green, less experienced, prone to panic. Yet what followed that morning would leave them shaken, bewildered, and forced to confront a nightmare they had never imagined. The first shots came from nowhere. A Panther on the ridge exploded in a sudden flash. Its turret lifted violently skyward. German officers barked orders, scanning the haze. The Americans had struck first, but how? Moments later, more shells whistled through the fog, finding their marks with uncanny accuracy. Panthers brewed up in fireballs, their crews scrambling out into the open fields. The survivors tried to return fire, but by the time they adjusted, the American tanks were gone, vanished back into the mist, their positions shifting before German gunners could lock on. It was like fighting phantoms. This was Aricourt, where 39 German Panthers attempted to dislodge the US 4th Armored Division. On paper, the Germans should have dominated. The Panther outclassed the Sherman in firepower, armor, and optics. But the battlefield was not paper. The Americans fought differently, flexible, coordinated, and supported by an invisible network that the Germans could neither disrupt nor replicate. Radios linked every tank, every infantry unit, every artillery battery. The moment a Panther was spotted, coordinates were relayed, and fire converged with ruthless precision. The Germans fought in isolated pockets. The Americans fought as a single living organism. German reports later described the battle with frustration. Tanks appeared where none should be, firing with impossible coordination. Assaults collapsed as artillery rained down within minutes of detection. Attempts to regroup were shattered by sudden thrusts of Sherman columns, moving faster than German command could anticipate. At Aricourt, 86 German tanks were lost. The Americans lost 25. The kill ratio spoke volumes. The Panther may have been the better tank, but the Sherman was part of a better system. The lesson repeated itself across Europe. At Seine-Nord during the breakout from Normandy, American bombers blanketed German positions with such ferocity that entire divisions were annihilated before they could counterattack. At Falaise, retreating Wehrmacht units looked up to see the skies darkened by B-17C and P-47S, their columns torn apart by bombs and strafing runs. Reports from German survivors described the feeling vividly. The earth opened, the sky collapsed, and we ceased to exist as soldiers. Even when German tanks managed to score victories on the ground, the skies above always turned the tide. The German generals were not blind to what was happening. After-action reports flowed back to Berlin, filled with the same chilling theme. American forces fought with a depth of resources that rendered tactical brilliance useless. General Hasso von Manteuffel, reflecting on Lorraine, admitted bitterly that his division had not been beaten by superior tanks, but by superior coordination and supply. They always had more, he lamented, and they always came back the next day. Perhaps the clearest example of this crushing advantage came in the skies over Regensburg and Schweinfurt, the heart of German ball-bearing production. In 1943, American bombers launched daring raids against these targets, suffering catastrophic losses, hundreds of aircraft shredded by flak and fighters. German commanders celebrated, believing they had broken the American spirit, but weeks later the formations returned. Then again and again, despite losing entire groups in flames, the United States simply replaced the planes, trained new crews, and pressed forward with unwavering determination. For the Germans who measured victory in attrition, this was a revelation bordering on despair. How could they fight an enemy who treated 100 plane losses as tolerable? Every German pilot, every tank commander, every infantryman who faced the Americans in late 1944 came away with the same impression: it was not the individual machine that killed them, but the system. A Panther could duel and win against a Sherman. A Luftwaffe ace could cut down a dozen bombers in a single sortie. But for every Sherman destroyed, another rolled off the docks in New York. For every bomber lost, another took flight from an airfield in England. Attrition, once Germany's weapon, had turned against them with crushing inevitability. Even at the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces launched one final desperate offensive in December 1944, the American hidden advantage showed itself. Fuel shortages crippled German armored columns, while American trucks and logistics chains surged replacements to the front. Snow choked the skies at first, grounding Allied planes. German soldiers celebrated as they advanced, but when the skies cleared, thousands of Thunderbolts and Mustangs roared overhead, strafing columns, blasting tanks and cutting supply lines to ribbons. The offensive, bold and brutal, collapsed under the weight of American production unleashed from the air. Captured German diaries from this period often describe a sense of futility. One officer wrote, "We destroyed their tanks. We destroyed their planes. Yet more always arrive. It is as if they grow from the ground itself." Another reflected grimly, "Against such numbers courage has no meaning. Untent from tense peries has no meaning." At Aricourt, at Normandy, at Schweinfurt, at the Ardennes, the lesson was etched in fire and steel. America's hidden advantage, its factories, its logistics, its endless skies, manifested in every engagement. Where German commanders once laughed at American industry, they now cursed it, for they had learned the cruelest truth of modern war: battles are not won by the best machine, but by the machine that can be built, supplied, and replaced in numbers beyond imagination. In the wreckage of burning Panthers, in the shattered Luftwaffe airfields, in the smouldering ruins of German industry, the reality was written for all to see. The hidden advantage was no longer hidden. It was everywhere, relentless and unstoppable. The German High Command, once intoxicated by its own brilliance, began to feel the suffocating weight of inevitability. The advantage the Americans wielded was not only measured in tanks and planes, but in the crushing psychological toll it exacted on the enemy. By late 1944, it was clear Germany was no longer fighting an army. It was fighting an industrial civilization. On the front lines, this imbalance was experienced in the most intimate, brutal ways. German platoons, once held together by the prestige of their commanders, now found themselves isolated. In the chaos of battle, when a command tank was destroyed, coordination collapsed. Orders became confused, movements uncoordinated, morale brittle. For the Americans, the opposite was true. With radios in nearly every vehicle and plane, leadership was fluid. If one commander fell, another voice instantly filled the silence. Tanks that should have been easy prey for panzers struck from multiple angles with uncanny timing. Artillery adjusted its fire within minutes, and air cover arrived precisely when needed. The battlefield itself became a web of connection that Germany could not penetrate. The psychological effect of this connectivity was profound. American crews spoke of confidence, of a sense that they were never truly alone. A Sherman crew could call for air support and hear the crackle of a Mustang pilot answering back. Infantry pinned down in a hedgerow could summon tanks and artillery with a few words. This invisible lifeline gave American soldiers a belief that no matter how bad things became, help was never far away. German soldiers, by contrast, felt abandoned in silence. Their radios often failed, their supply lines crumbled under air attack, and their commanders issued orders that never reached the front in time. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of the Reich, withered under this pressure. German pilots who had survived years of combat now climbed into cockpits with dread, not anticipation. They knew the odds. For every sortie they flew, dozens of American fighters swarmed the skies, escorting bombers that never seemed to end. Even when a German ace scored kills, there was no celebration, only exhaustion. They would return to bases short on fuel, short on spare parts, short on replacements. Meanwhile, across the Channel, American airfields roared with constant activity, fresh pilots climbing into brand new machines rolling off the assembly line that very week. The contrast crushed morale before the battle even began. Strategically, the effect was devastating. Germany's war machine had been designed for quick victories. Blitzkrieg worked when the enemy collapsed swiftly, when resources could be captured before shortages set in. Against America, this strategy was meaningless. Every battle lost by the Americans only seemed to harden their resolve. Every setback was temporary, because the river of production never slowed. German generals realized with horror that they could no longer win by maneuver or surprise. The Americans were not just fighting battles, they were grinding down the Reich itself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to resist. The German people felt the weight as well. Cities that had once celebrated swift victories now shuddered under endless waves of bombers. Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, all became infernos under the relentless assault. Civilians looked to the skies with a mix of terror and resignation, realizing that their leaders had promised protection they could not deliver. Each raid destroyed not only factories and homes, but also faith. If the Americans could send 1,000 bombers one week and another 1,000 the next, what hope was left? The Reich's aura of invincibility dissolved under the ceaseless hum of enemy engines. Even Hitler, stubborn in his delusions, raged at the reality he refused to accept. He demanded miracle weapons, the V-2 rocket, the Mir-262 jet, the Tiger Turken tank, to reverse the tide. And though each was technically impressive, none could alter the strategic truth. A rocket could terrorize London, but it could not stop the destruction of German oil fields. A jet could down a bomber, but it could not stop 1,000 more from arriving the next day. A Tiger Turk could crush Shermans, but it could not halt the endless convoys supplying the Allies. The American advantage had grown so overwhelming that German wonder weapons became symbols of desperation, not salvation. The psychological contrast between the two sides only deepened. For American crews, the sight of endless convoys, endless replacements, endless aircraft instilled a confidence bordering on inevitability. They could endure hardship, because they knew the arsenal behind them was inexhaustible. For German soldiers, the same reality became suffocating. Courage turned to futility, skill turned to despair. One diary from a German infantryman captured the feeling: each day we destroy, but each night they build again. We are drowning in an ocean of steel. This despair reached even the highest ranks. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring admitted privately that German strategy had no answer to American industry. We could win battles, he reflected, but never the war. They replaced faster than we destroyed. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, conceded after the war that Germany had underestimated America fatally. We built weapons. They built a system. The strategic impact was unmistakable. American production allowed for simultaneous offensives on multiple fronts. While Germany strained to hold the Eastern Front against the Soviets, the Americans supplied Britain, liberated North Africa, landed in Italy, and prepared for the invasion of France, all at once. The Reich faced not just one war, but many wars, all fueled by the same bottomless reservoir of American steel and resolve. The hidden advantage had become a psychological weapon in itself. Every German soldier knew, deep down, that no matter how bravely they fought, no matter how many tanks they destroyed or planes they shot down, the Americans could simply replace them. The war had shifted from a contest of skill to a contest of endurance, and endurance was America's greatest strength. By the winter of 1944, the once confident laughter of German generals had turned hollow. What they had dismissed as weakness had become the hammer of their destruction. They realized too late that in modern war, psychology was as decisive as firepower, and nothing crushed the spirit more than fighting an enemy who seemed infinite. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the ruins of the Reich stood as monuments to a lesson its generals had refused to learn. Streets once filled with parades were now choked with rubble, cities reduced to ashes beneath the endless waves of American bombers. The laughter that had once echoed in Berlin's grand halls was gone, buried under mountains of steel, concrete, and shattered pride. Germany's military brilliance had been real, its tanks formidable, its aircraft advanced, its soldiers seasoned, but brilliance had met something greater, an industrial force so vast, so disciplined, that no amount of tactical genius could resist it. The legacy of America's 100,000 planes was not merely in the battles they won, but in the truth, they revealed about modern war. Firepower was no longer enough. Speed alone could not save an army. Even courage, valor, and sacrifice were powerless against an enemy who could build faster, replace faster, and return to the skies in greater numbers than imagination had once allowed. The United States had proven that in the 20th century, war was not only fought by soldiers, it was fought by nations. Every rivet driven into a bomber wing, every shift worked through the night, every ton of steel melted in American furnaces became as decisive as bullets fired on the front lines. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, standing at the signing of Germany's surrender, reflected bitterly that the Allies had won not only with weapons, but with industry. Later, Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, admitted with rare candor, "We built tanks better, but you built tanks faster. We built aircraft of precision, but you built aircraft in floods. In the end, numbers conquered." These words, spoken in defeat, encapsulated the lesson the Reich had been too arrogant to see until it was too late. The influence of this industrial victory did not fade with the war's end. In the decades that followed, military strategists studied the American example with reverence and caution. The Cold War was not merely a contest of ideology, but of production capacity. The United States once again mobilized factories for the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the arms race against the Soviet Union. The idea of network-centric warfare, connecting units through communication, coordination, and logistics, was born from the experiences of World War II. Radios that once guided Sherman tanks across French fields evolved into satellites and digital systems linking troops across the globe. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the echoes of America's World War II legacy resounded in the skies over Iraq. Coalition forces, armed with precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, and overwhelming coordination, obliterated the Iraqi army in days. Once again, the world saw the lesson of the 1940s, that war was no longer about the brilliance of individual machines or commanders, but about the integration of technology, production, and communication into a seamless whole. Just as the Luftwaffe had been drowned by the tide of American bombers, so too was Saddam Hussein's army paralyzed by the modern descendants of that same doctrine. Even in the 21st century, the ghost of those 100,000 planes looms over every military calculation. Drones, satellites, cyber warfare, all are built upon the foundation laid in the 1940s, when the United States proved that no enemy could withstand a nation whose entire industrial heart beat in rhythm with its soldiers at the front. The laughter of the German generals has become a cautionary tale, a reminder that underestimating an opponent's capacity to build, adapt, and endure is the most fatal mistake a strategist can make. Yet beyond the strategy and the numbers lies the human legacy. For the veterans who flew in those formations, who clung to burning bombers or dived their Mustangs into enemy squadrons, the memory is more than statistics. It is the sound of engines in unison, the smell of cordite and oil, the sight of comrades falling from the sky while the mission pressed on. For the families who worked the assembly lines, it is the calloused hands, the sleepless nights, the quiet pride of knowing that every rivet and every bullet forged in American factories was a step toward ending tyranny. For the German civilians who cowered in cellars as cities burned, it is the devastating realization that war had shifted beyond the control of any battlefield commander, that industry itself had become the executioner. And for the generations that followed, it is a lesson written in fire and shadow in modern war. The ability to connect, to supply, and to outproduce will always eclipse the sharpest sword or the finest tank. The Tiger may have roared, the May 262 may have flown faster than sound seemed to allow, but against the storm of American steel, they were relics of an old age, swept aside by the relentless tide of modernity. The Reich fell not only because of Allied bravery, nor solely because of Soviet sacrifice, but because it mocked what it did not understand. It laughed at assembly lines. It sneered at consumer factories. It dismissed a culture of abundance as weakness, and in that arrogance it sealed its fate. The skies filled with 100,000 planes were the proof, the living embodiment of a truth the German generals had laughed away until the moment those shadows darkened their cities. In the end, the war was not won only in the fields of Normandy, the ruins of Stalingrad, or the hedgerows of Lorraine. It was won in Detroit, in Seattle, in Pittsburgh, in every small town where a welder struck steel, or a riveter hammered aluminum, it was won by a nation that transformed its economy into a weapon greater than any general's plan. The lesson endures, etched into the ruins of the Third Reich, and the wings of those bombers that once blotted out the sun. In the crucible of modern war, connection outweighs firepower, speed defeats armor, and industry decides destiny.